Good evening, everyone. We're going to make a start now. Thank you for joining us this evening for a briefing on the Places for People programme and measures being delivered in Moseley and Kings Heath. My name's Joe Green. I'm Travel Demand Manager with Birmingham City Council. I'm responsible for coordinating the Places for People programme, which the City Council launched this June. I'm working with a number of colleagues, consultants, delivery partners and contractors on bringing this forward through the Birmingham Emergency Transport Plan and Active Travel Fund. The purpose for this evening is to provide a bit of an overview and briefing of some measures that will be delivered over the coming month, but also to place that very much in a sort of wider context, both in terms of the background and policy context to that, and in terms of sort of future delivery and next steps. We are joined this evening by some of the ward councillors for both Moseley and Brandwood and Kings Heath. Both Councillor Kerry Jenkins and Councillor Mike Leddy are with us. Councillor Lisa Trickett has a diary clash with another meeting, but is trying to listen into this and will be following up afterwards. And we have had apologies from Councillor Martin Straker-Wells. Unfortunately, we've needed to organise these sessions at relatively short notice, and with everyone's diaries, it hasn't been possible for everyone to join. But just to sort of emphasise that your local councillors are very much engaged with this programme and are in regular contact with myself and others around what is progressing, but also in terms of feeding back and representing local residents' views, perspectives, comments and questions, and will continue to do so as everything progresses. So in terms of the session outline, we have about an hour. We will sort of look to finish pretty promptly at 7. The first half or so will take you through some slides as outlined there, and then at the end there will be an opportunity for sort of questions. Unfortunately, with Microsoft Teams live events, it isn't possible for participants to join the meeting via camera or microphone, but there is a Q&A chat in which people can record questions throughout the presentation and also make comments, and that will get published for everyone, and those comments can also be reviewed following the meeting. So if you do have anything that you want to raise at any point, please do add that into the Q&A chat, and we'll try and pick up as much as possible. We'll also explain at the end how going forward people can raise any questions, make comments, give feedback. And we'll pick up some of the sort of more specific questions and queries following on from that. So the session outline is to give a bit of a policy context to the Places for People programme and how that is progressing now through the Emergency Active Travel Fund, a little bit of an overview of low traffic neighbourhoods, and then to sort of look at what particularly is being brought forward in the Moseley and Kings Heath area. Some of the initial engagement that we've done there, the pilot measures that will be delivered, and then also the sort of what happens next and future delivery, before finishing with some questions at the end. I know some people may well have joined a similar briefing for the Kings Heath low traffic neighbourhood pilot a couple of weeks ago. Apologies, there will be some repetition because it is the same sort of programme and background, but we will also be looking very much at the specific measures that are being progressed along Poplar Road, Cambridge Road and School Road. In terms of the Places for People programme, this is something that we launched this June. And it is all around reclaiming local streets for walking and cycling, but also potentially for sort of playing and socialising, and creating an environment with cleaner air, quieter, less noise and safer. And the way in which that is done is by reducing the volume of traffic on and around these residential streets. Although the programme was launched in June, this is very much in keeping with the policy direction that Birmingham City Council has been taking for a number of years. It is a key component of our draft Birmingham Transport Plan that was published for consultation back in January. And one of 4 big moves within that transport plan was prioritising active travel in local neighbourhoods. which places for people is central to. What this looks to do is ensure that active travel or walking and cycling is how most people get around their locality most of the time, ensuring that cars no longer dominate street life around people's homes and schools, and ensuring that residential neighbourhoods and local centres are places where people are put first. So places for people is a key component of delivering that big move within the draft Birmingham Transport Plan. But even earlier than then, this is something that has been in the thinking in terms of the walking and cycling strategy that Cabinet approved this January, which talked about developing low traffic neighbourhoods and car-free school streets through technical term filtered permeability, through parking management and through streetscape or public realm improvements. This fits with the road safety strategy that we published back in 2016. Around developing safer roads and ensuring that people can get around by various modes of transport in as safe a way as possible, and also introducing 20-mile-per-hour speed limits on residential roads and in local centres, which aligns very closely with places for people because it's also about a low speed environment. This contributes towards our draft clean air strategy published last year, which looks at taking a citywide approach to tackling and reducing air pollution across Birmingham by improving the transport network and increasing the range of cleaner, sustainable journey options available to people, and linking into the climate emergency that the City Council declared last June. The Route to Zero task force established around that. Transport is one of 7 work streams. Looking at bringing that forward, and again, places for people really contributes quite a lot there. And also this sort of fits with the regional physical activity strategy, West Midlands on the Move. Encouraging walking and cycling is a great way of encouraging more physical activity, as well as being great for mental health and emotional well-being, and anything that we can do to create an environment that's more conducive for walking and cycling has a range of benefits as sort of shown there. And this isn't just something that the Birmingham City Council is working on in isolation. It fits very much with national government policy, and just a couple of months ago, back in July, the Department for Transport published a new cycling and walking plan, gear change, and low traffic neighbourhoods were right at the heart of that plan, talking about how at the moment residential side streets are often really sort of blighted by rat running or high volume of through traffic, and that low traffic neighbourhoods is a way to try and address that across the country. Within this, it's still possible to access any road in the area, but motor traffic would not be able to use the roads as through routes. And the impact of that is that accidents, pollution and noise can all be sort of dramatically reduced for local residents. So this is something that we've been working on for quite some time. And obviously, as people are fully aware, about 6 months ago, the whole sort of external environment changed. And back in March, just as we were coming to the end of the consultation on the emergency transport plan, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, we were placed into lockdown, and everything sort of changed. What we did see, firstly, was a massive reduction in traffic levels overall. I think at the height in sort of end of March, it was down to below a third of usual sort of traffic levels. And the result of that was quieter streets, improved air quality, and more pleasant residential environments across the city. And in a way, overnight, we had a pilot or an insight of what low traffic neighbourhoods could look like. At that time, a lot more people were walking and cycling, generally for leisure or exercise. A lot of people were also shopping more locally, some by foot or on bike. At that time, there were some particular issues around speeding, dangerous driving, and we were getting those reports. And I think what that shows is how actually at times congestion does act as a form of traffic calming, although not a particularly good one because of the other sort of disbenefits that it brings around delays to people's journey times, air pollution, etc. But when the roads are clearer, that does mean that there are potentially some issues around speeding, dangerous driving that do need addressing. And also, since lockdown and still to this day, there are some real sort of challenges around public transport, both in terms of capacity on buses, trains, trams, and people's confidence in using that. And if we don't provide some alternatives to car travel for people who may generally have used public transport in the past, then that could create real sort of issues around our roads and transport network. So what the council sort of felt is, as we started to ease out of lockdown and various areas started to open up again, we wanted to look at how we could lock in some of those benefits as lockdown eased, and this was why we published the emergency transport plan back in May. And the emergency transport plan was based very much on the same vision and big moves as the draft Birmingham transport plan, but reframing that to the new challenge of ensuring a low carbon, clean air recovery from COVID-19, creating safer space for walking and cycling, and also this sort of new phenomenon of social distancing and enabling people to be able to get about and to resume various activity whilst keeping some sort of distance from others. Something that was identified within the emergency transport plan was that we wanted to deliver low traffic neighbourhood pilots in at least 2 areas, as well as some other sort of early demonstration measures. And at the same time, alongside that, undertake some work to identify how this will be extended across the whole city and as part of our ongoing Transport and Highways Capital programme. And the good news is there was actually some funding available to do this, which from a local authority perspective is always very welcome. And the Department for Transport in sort of May, June time announced the Emergency Active Travel Fund for local authorities and combined authorities as part of a £2 billion package to create a new era for walking and cycling, and that 250 million of that would be made available this financial year, 2020-21, for local authorities to use primarily on to implement temporary interventions to improve conditions for walking and cycling. The guidance around the Emergency Active Travel Fund was very strong and very clear, is that local authorities to receive this funding need to demonstrate that they have got swift and meaningful plans to really sort of alter the status quo and reallocate road space for people on foot and on bike. And they did sort of highlight within that one quick and relatively cheap way of achieving and delivering this is point closures or road closures, which can be used to begin to create low traffic neighbourhoods. The Emergency Active Travel Fund is being released to local authorities, in our case through the West Midlands Combined Authority, in 2 tranches. Tranche 1 has been released now and we're currently delivering that. That's roughly for the sort of quarter between July and September. A second tranche will hopefully be forthcoming very soon, and that is for the 6-month period between October and March 2021. We received confirmation of funding on the 7th of July from the Department for Transport. We actually, both in Birmingham and the West Midlands region, were very successful with the bid that we put in and received more money than we requested, and as we'd been told would be our indicative allocation. And what that's meant is we've had just over £1 million for delivering schemes July to September. We also added £500,000 of match funding into that so that we could bring forward quite a sort of comprehensive programme of temporary schemes to be delivered over this current sort of period. This included 2 low traffic neighbourhood pilots in Kings Heath and Lascelles, and people who did join the session a couple of weeks ago would have seen a lot more about the background and proposals for the Kings Heath low traffic neighbourhood pilot. But also we wanted to bring forward some early demonstration measures in other parts of the city where we'd like to create low traffic neighbourhoods in future. And when I say in future, I'm sort of talking very near future. So we are looking to bring these forward in Bourneville, Castle Vale and Moseley. What we have done with what we're talking about tonight is, as people will be fully aware from living in the area, that Moseley and Kings Heath almost join and in some ways overlap. And as we started to bring forward measures on Kings Heath and Poplar Road, it was very clear that that needed to be aligned with some of these early measures in Moseley on School Road and Cambridge Road. So what we're now doing is packaging that up as one scheme in terms of those three measures, although it's originally Poplar Road has originally come from the Kings Heath pilot. As well as the low traffic neighbourhoods and places for people measures, we're delivering a number of pop-up cycle lanes across the city. We're doing quite a bit of work in the city centre, and we have delivered some schemes in local centres, including Moseley and Sturchley and Kings Heath, where we've looked to widen pavements, create additional space for people, both for walking through and social distancing when queuing. So there's schemes being delivered across the city, and I think what this sort of shows is the ambition of bringing forward 14 new temporary schemes in a very short period as part of Emergency Active Travel Fund Tranche 1. Really does sort of demonstrate Birmingham City Council's ambition on this. What we've developed around the low traffic neighbourhoods, but also across a number of the Emergency Active Travel Fund schemes, is a bit of a staged approach to how these are delivered. And I think that's because these are initially temporary changes. And I do sort of say that genuinely. I know sometimes there's a bit of scepticism around when the council makes some of these changes, that it's a backdoor route to bring in things. But actually, because of the emergency nature of this situation and what we're responding to, this is very much sort of starting off as quick temporary changes to streets. Through doing that, what we want to do with these schemes is look at how we can start to use street space differently. And involving local residents and other stakeholders in that process and in those discussions is really, really important. And I will highlight the need and the value of engagement shortly in this presentation. And then as we progress, as we sort of move in towards the end of this financial year, we will start to have some consideration and discussion around potential for making some of these changes more permanent, although that will again very much be done in conjunction, in partnership with local residents, businesses and other stakeholders, and it will all be sort of subject to formal consultation, as you would expect with any permanent scheme that the council is bringing forward. I just briefly want to sort of provide a little bit of information around what are low traffic neighbourhoods. I know that some people listening in tonight will be incredibly familiar with this term. For others, it may be sort of a very sort of new concept and approach. And I think one way of sort of visualising it is to sort of go back to the height of lockdown and when there was a lot less traffic on the street and residential streets weren't so sort of dominated by motor vehicles and through traffic. Fundamentally, low traffic neighbourhoods are groups of residential streets where through trips, cut through, run, whichever term you want to use, by motor vehicles are either sort of discouraged or completely restricted so that it's not possible. What that doesn't do is stop anyone who lives in the area from accessing their own home, from going where they need to go, to the doctors, to the shops, having visitors, receiving deliveries. All the sort of usual things. Is access to everywhere is still possible. The changes do mean that sometimes that's by a different route, and sometimes it is by a slightly longer route, but the sort of the benefit or the payoff of that is having this more sort of conducive environment on and around the streets where you live. So access continues to be possible to everywhere where people need to get to and from. I think something else that has been raised quite a lot, and I can understand why, is that low traffic neighbourhoods are focusing on residential streets, but that there are sort of border roads or main roads or distributor roads going around those. And sometimes the classification between different types of roads isn't that clear, and even on what we'd sort of see as main roads, so A roads, etc., people do live on those as well. Low traffic neighbourhoods do not ignore those areas, and they are just as much a part of the low traffic neighbourhood approach as the residential streets within the areas. What we look to do on some of those roads is a whole host of other things to reduce traffic by providing alternatives around walking and cycling routes, enhanced public transport provision, and also a lot of traffic management stuff to manage the remaining traffic, whether that's traffic calming, speed reduction, providing safer crossings so that people are able to cross those main roads. On some of those, looking at having segregated cycle routes, as we do have in parts of the city. So I want to be quite sort of clear that low traffic neighbourhoods are not just about sort of very local residential streets. It is about the whole area and looking at how we reduce traffic across the whole areas that we're working in. And going back to the very sort of start in terms of places for people, what we're looking to achieve by reducing the amount of traffic is create an environment that's nicer to be in, quieter, and it feels safer to walk, cycle, play, chat and spend your time. This is something that has been brought forward quite a bit in London over the past 5 or so years, in a number of boroughs, but particularly Waltham Forest, Hackney and some others. The Waltham Forest programme is one that is often sort of held up as a great example of how low traffic neighbourhoods can really benefit when done well and when properly resourced. Orford Road, these two photos are a bit of a before and after view of the same street. Orford Road is to some extent comparable with somewhere like Poplar Road. It does have some sort of businesses, shops, premises on there, but what they've done is remove the through traffic. Those places can still be served in the picture on the right for deliveries and people can still access all of those businesses, but it's now a much nicer environment to visit on foot, on bike, and to spend time, and a lot of these businesses have really sort of seen the benefits of that. And the other reason that Waltham Forest is often sort of highlighted is there has been a lot of research and evaluation carried out on the Waltham Forest Mini Holland programme by universities and linking with various academics, highlighting the wide-ranging benefits that Waltham Forest has experienced. What they've seen over the past sort of 5 years is a real increase in people walking and cycling, especially walking, and actually following on from that, from a more longitudinal study, an increase in people's life expectancy within this area. As I mentioned, it's had benefits for business, both in terms of retail, and it's seen a reduction in vacancy rates on some of those premises. It's seen a reduction in vehicles within the area, but also on those sort of connecting distributor main roads that I mentioned, and this sort of concept of traffic evaporation, where people either decide to walk or cycle instead, or they look to reroute completely away from the area because there's no sort of sense in their journey taking them through these areas. So there's been some real sort of benefits from Waltham Forest, and what we're now hoping to do is really sort of replicate and bring that forward in Birmingham this year and beyond. So I mentioned earlier that engagement is really important to bringing forward low traffic neighbourhoods and creating places for people. We have to be completely honest, it has been incredibly challenging to do that over the past 2 to 3 months as we've brought these schemes forward, partly because we've been working to a very tight timescale, and that was part of the Department for Transport funding criteria, but also the restrictions that are currently in place have sort of limited what we've been able to do so far, and some of the sort of traditional engagement methods haven't been available to us. But we have genuinely made sort of attempts to engage where we can. One of the main ways we've done that is through the Commonplace digital platform website, which we launched at the earliest possible opportunity to provide information on these schemes, to start to receive comments and feedback, and to share more and more information as everything progressed. And that is something that will continue throughout the lifetime of these projects. We have also tried to sort of get out in the areas to some extent and display posters in some shops. We have been promoting this on social media. We've been contactable and available via phone, text, email, and getting word out. We've had a lot of sort of discussions with local councillors, as I say, for both Moseley and Brandwood and Kings Heath, and they have very much been reflecting back comments and correspondence that they've been receiving, highlighting residents' views in terms of changes people want to see, but also some of the concerns people have. We've now set up some sort of letter drop. We've delivered letters across the area, and we've also set up some comment boxes in a number of locations. So we have one at Cambridge Road Methodist Church, where if people aren't able to submit feedback online, then they are able to post comments there, and they will be collected from the church at least once a week. We've also got one at Sainsbury's at the top of Kings Heath High Street if people wish to submit comments there too. And we're running these online briefing sessions, and will continue to do so. There are some other things that we haven't been able to do yet, but we are looking to bring that in as soon as we can. And part of that is around what the restrictions currently in place prevent. We will be looking to undertake a resident survey at some stage. We have done that to some extent with Commonplace for the Kings Heath and Lozells low traffic neighbourhood pilots. And we'd like to do something for the wider Moseley area. I think now's a good time to mention we're also working with the Better Streets for Moseley group. I know they're very keen to carry out a resident survey as well. So I think what we'll try and do is align things there so that you're not getting sort of survey overload. And if we feel that it's better for Better Streets for Moseley to carry out that survey and share findings with the council, then we're very happy to work that way. Normally with something like this, we would want to do public meetings or drop-in events. It is very strange giving a presentation like this, sat in my spare room talking to a laptop screen on my own. In many ways, it would be much more preferable to be with you in person this evening and be able to have much more two-way dialogue. But we are where we are on this. Likewise with drop-in events, those are sort of things that we have ran in the past on School Road in particular previously. And we do very much want to do so again as and when we are able to, but it isn't something that the council is sort of permitting at the current time. When we are able to do that again, it may well be that those things work a bit differently. So it might be that people need to make sort of pre-arranged appointments, or we're very much limiting numbers, but there is a genuine desire to sort of get out and talk to people whenever we can. We will be looking to do some on-street pop-up activities around a lot of these measures as and when they go in. And I think as we move into the next stage of project delivery, what we'd like to see more of is sort of like design workshops, where people who are interested can join us, whether that's in person or online will sort of depend on where we are at the time, but go through a bit of a co-design process. We are also keen to meet with community and resident groups. I mentioned Better Streets for Moseley. We've also had contact with Moseley Forum and various other organisations, and with Kings Heath with the Resident Forum and Clean Air Network, and also Better Streets for B14. So there's a number of groups out there. If I've missed anyone off, I'm sorry. It's not deliberate, and we're very happy to work with and talk to anyone. We will also look to have some more formal consultation on future proposals, both in terms of anything that is going to be made more permanent, but also hopefully within the second tranche of funding, because we've got 6 months rather than 2 or 3 months, we can build in a consultation period. And the other thing we're looking to do now is involve local residents in the monitoring of these schemes. I've had contact with some residents who are keen to do traffic counts on their road. We're also looking at some air quality monitoring using diffusion tubes. So I think I will sort of completely hold my hands up and say engagement to date has not been as wide-ranging as it could have been, but there is a bit of a reason for that. But it is something that we are trying to do what we can, and we do want to do much more in future. But we are sort of working in quite challenging times, and any activities that we do organise have to be delivered in line with the latest guidance from public health, from national government, and then have to be delivered in line with any requirements or restrictions that are in place at the time, and public safety will always come first on that. Okay. I mentioned the Commonplace site. What I just wanted to sort of do briefly is share a little bit of feedback that we have had through the Commonplace site. As of today, we get weekly downloads from this site, so we can sort of review how this is changing over time. People are also able to make more than one comment if they wish. So if you have commented on places for people previously, but after tonight, after hearing a bit more, you want to make any other comments, you're welcome to do so. On the Moseley Places for People site, which initially was focused on the School Road and Cambridge Road measures, we have had 370 comments in total. 330 of those indicated that they live in the Moseley area, while 19 did not and 21 didn't specify. As I mentioned, people can make more than one comment, so those 370 comments doesn't necessarily mean 370 people, but we are able to sort feedback by number of respondents. And I think with this one, with these comments, that there isn't anyone who's made more than 3 or 4 comments on the Moseley Places for People site. If someone did all of a sudden start making 20 or 30 comments and wanting to influence some of these figures, then we can also present this and sort it by number of respondents rather than number of comments. But at the moment, what you can see is of those 370 comments to date, 60–70% of them are positive or mostly positive, 15–20% are negative or mostly negative, and then some in the middle are neutral. We did include some information about proposed measures on School Road and Cambridge Road as part of this, and as part of the comments people have made, we are able to sort of look at people's views and comments on those individual schemes measures. So with School Road, some people are sort of very positive. They feel that it's at the heart of the neighbourhood, and something to address traffic there will benefit the whole area and encourage walking and cycling on that route, and also sort of recognising that trialling something is a good way of starting and seeing the sort of results of this as a bit of a live experiment. Some of the people sort of disagreed and feel that although something is needed, this isn't necessarily the best solution, that it doesn't address some of the issues that we know there are on School Road around pavement driving and at the narrowest section of the road, where we have sort of tried to put in some sort of temporary bollards as one way of addressing that. I mean, I think in terms of why some roads should be traffic free and others have all the traffic, certainly nothing that we're doing here is creating a traffic free environment, but it is around trying to sort of reduce through traffic. But then that does raise the question of where through traffic will go instead, and it is important that we do look at monitoring and addressing that as necessary. In terms of the measure on Cambridge Road, again, some people think that it's a good idea, that it will sort of help to reduce the complexity of the roundabout, which has got currently a 5-arm roundabout, and particularly at school drop-off time can have cars coming from all directions. So by removing one of those 5 arms as well as modal filters on 2 of the other arms, hopefully it will reduce the busyness of that roundabout and the area by the side of the Methodist Church, that it will sort of take out any potential for sort of traffic deflection from the Poplar Road and School Road closures, where traffic coming up to the roundabout could deflect onto Cambridge Road. And at the current situation, it is quite a sort of hostile environment for people cycling, children going to school and local residents. Again, some of the people didn't necessarily agree or support this proposal, feeling that the area isn't particularly busy at present, so why should it be prioritised for measures? Someone feels that it will create enormous problems for residents and will solve nothing, and that's certainly not our intention. But if we get sort of 3 months into this and the feedback from residents on Cambridge Road is that it's solving nothing, we can look at removing that, and also an acknowledgement that existing speed restrictions should be enforced, and you're not going to get any disagreement from me on that. We've introduced 20-mile-per-hour speed limits across this area. That doesn't mean that they get observed by everyone, and we do need to work closely with the police and other partners on trying to ensure speed enforcement of those limits. So very quickly, to give an overview of the locations of the proposed measures and to explain a little bit of the logic to why we're bringing this forward at the current time, ahead of further engagement and delivery across a wider area. The Poplar Road measure actually was first proposed as part of the Kings Heath LTN pilot. What we have done with the rest of the Kings Heath pilot on the eastern side of the High Street is moved some of that delivery into a second phase of the pilot, so we can look at issues and concerns raised around Valentine Road, Springfield Road, Addison Road, and look at what streets should be included within a low traffic neighbourhood area or segment or cell, and what roads should have to some degree a level of through traffic. People living on those roads will have different views, and it's important that we engage with them and look at what the right solutions are. We also have to look at where bus services run, and with both Addison Road and Springfield Road there are some bus services, and we do need to work with bus operators around what measures we might bring forward there. But the Poplar Road measure, if it was felt, could come forward. It would have real benefits for reducing through traffic there, particularly around Kings Heath Primary School. School Road, historically, it's been an area that we've been looking at for a number of years now, and a previous Safer Routes to School scheme was looking at a modal filter in the area between Cotton Lane and Greenhill Road. That was something that we were hoping to progress to formal consultation just prior to lockdown. There was an opportunity to review that measure and include it as part of the Emergency Active Travel Fund scheme on a temporary trial basis, and alongside wider places for people approach. And also, as I mentioned, Cambridge Road, there's some real sort of benefits there around the roundabout and ensuring that that's a sort of a less busy and complex traffic movement junction, but also any sort of traffic deflection through that road. I appreciate that residents have raised concerns around traffic displacement onto some of the other roads and parallel streets there. That is something that will be monitored very, very closely. And if there are particular issues arising on any of those other locations, then we will look to address that through remedial or mitigation measures as appropriate. The other thing with the Cambridge Road area is it really creates an opportunity for a people place at the bottom end of Cambridge Road by the side of the church, and that is something that going forward we're really keen to spend a lot of time with local residents and others around how this street space can start to be used differently. I'm going to go through very quickly, because conscious of time, the plans that we have put on the Commonplace website, but what this shows is where the modal filters on these three roads would be located. A modal filter is basically something that prevents through motor traffic but allows movement on foot, bike, mobility scooter. And the way that that's done generally is it's a closure of the road and a traffic restriction with a couple of planters, and then at some stage a barrier in the road, often a bollard. We're currently working through various options on the bollards that will follow around what access requirements are for waste collection, for emergency services, because that could be a static bollard, it could be a collapsible or lockable bollard. And without getting too technical with everyone right now, part of the first stage of the trial is to get the planters in, to get the vehicle restrictions in place, and then to work with sort of key partners, statutory consultees on exactly what measures are going in there. But Poplar Road, there will be a modal filter between the entrance to Asda and Woodville Road. Again, as I mentioned before, real sort of benefits for Kings Heath Primary School. The school keep clear markings will remain in place. Cambridge Road, looking at a closure at the bottom end by the roundabout, and having two sets of modal filters there to create this people place and an area where we can work with local residents about what goes there, whether that's an area that benches could be installed, whether it's a space for activity to take place, because the only sort of any through traffic you'd have there would be people on foot, bike, scooter. There wouldn't be any through traffic in that area. Some residents have raised concerns and questions around loss of parking, so I think that's something that we'll look at quite closely in the early stage and work to sort of decide what people's preference is. There is a way of delivering this modal filter with just the closure point on the left hand side and losing less parking, but then what you don't get is the people place. So I think that's one where we need to work with local residents on what the parking requirements are and what's the best use of space. And then finally, School Road, a closure point just north of the Greenhill and Green End Road junction, angled slightly so that the space can be closed off with the installation of two planters, and any sort of vehicle turning movements can still be accommodated there where necessary. And that's something that again will be delivered through sort of two planters and the option of a static or lockable bollard that will go in there, but it will probably be the planters and the signs with a road closed board that will go in the first instance. And to just go back to the delivery process staged approach that I shared early in the presentation, what we've looked to do in some places is sort of quick temporary changes to the street using temporary traffic management, and this is how we've removed parking on Kings Heath High Street, put in changes in some of the local centres, also some measures in the city centre. The initial thinking was to use this for the road closures in Kings Heath and Moseley in the first instance, and then follow that up with stage 2 relatively soon. I think what we've sort of experienced and also seen from elsewhere is there have been some real issues with that sort of stage 1 approach when it comes to road closures, with a lot of that equipment just getting moved out the way, and it sort of jeopardises the whole delivery of the measure. So I think what we're going to sort of look to is sort of starting off with a stage 1.2, where we will have 2 planters with some temporary traffic management in the middle, but then looking to move to stage 2 relatively quickly as part of the pilot. And then in terms of making something more permanent, we will look at whether that is something for any of these locations at the end of this period, at the end of the sort of the 6-month trial. Just to sort of say, obviously all of the designs, as you've seen on the plans, will be adapted for the particular location so that it is suitable. So where we are now and what happens next is we're just finalising everything for delivery of these measures as outlined. That these first trial measures will be delivered this month in September, probably in the next 2 weeks. As soon as we have confirmed implementation dates, we will make that available. I think I have a meeting with the contractors this Thursday where that will be discussed. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to confirm implementation on the back of that. In terms of how it will be done, obviously some of the lining, marking, signage will go in prior to the modal filters being installed. I'm thinking the modal filters are going to be installed around the 18th of September, which is a week on Friday, but we will confirm that as soon as we can. As I said, we are hoping to organise some pop-up community events around these measures going in where we can, where that's appropriate. We're working with a couple of delivery partners, the Active Wellbeing Society and Sustrans, who are both very sort of experienced in working with local communities around this and all sorts of things. They're keen to sort of do some pop-ups where they can talk to local residents about what's happening, get feedback. I think we're currently looking at the term chatty corners, sort of setting up some places where people can come along and have a chat, provide some tea and coffee, and talk about what's happening. Also look at doing maybe some community planting, look at doing some art work. But what we are doing at this stage is temporary trial measures, and again, I know there's some cynicism around whether this is really the sort of council hidden agenda to get these in and it will never go. These are genuine temporary trial measures. We will be monitoring them very closely to assess their impact, and we will be working with residents and everyone else to get feedback on how it's working and what happens next. They're being delivered using experimental traffic regulation orders, which can stay in place for a maximum of 18 months, but we are currently approaching this as a 6-month pilot, and that first 6 months does act as a formal consultation period. Within the experimental TRO, there is potential for changes, modifications to be made, or even for the measures to be removed where necessary. So as I said, with Cambridge Road, if it was felt that actually the loss of parking is not acceptable and we need to take the one modal filter out and just have the closure at the roundabout, that is something that we can do within this order. Or if it was felt that actually the closure on Cambridge Road was causing so many issues and displacement onto neighbouring parallel streets, there is scope for that measure to be removed entirely. However, I think we do need to allow for a little bit of a bedding in period because people do take time to adapt and adjust and to reroute some of their journeys. So I think we will be sort of looking to give it a little bit of a trial to see how it goes, and allow a bit of time before determining the overall impact of measures. What I will say on that is if there was anything happening that was unsafe or intolerable, then when we would act quickly. And we have already made some changes to some of the other schemes. For example, Sturchley Local Centre, where we've made some changes to the parking arrangements there. So we will sort of look to make those changes. And this does mark the start of an engagement process for the second tranche of Emergency Active Travel Fund money. And that's the whole point of bringing forward some early demonstration measures to sort of kickstart engagement on this. So as I say, we're sort of currently waiting on the outcome of the funding submission. We're hoping to get that very soon, hopefully in the next week or so. We put in a strong bid there with our partners in the Combined Authority and neighbouring local authorities. So fingers crossed we will be receiving sufficient funding to do everything that we wish to do here. As soon as we do get that confirmed, we'll be mobilising very quickly and confirming exactly what we will be delivering as part of Tranche 2. But Moseley and Kings Heath are right at the front of the queue for future low traffic neighbourhood development. And what we have done is put together a bit of a delivery plan timescale for the second tranche of funding to allow for more time for engagement and consultation. So in the first month, we'll look to confirm the actual area where measures will be delivered, and no final decisions have been made on that. I know some people have asked why certain roads are or aren't included. Nothing final has been decided there. We're still happy to hear people's comments on where should be included, what should happen. And then on the back of that being announced, sort of October, November time, trying to arrange as much engagement with local residents and others as possible to inform the development and design of future schemes, to get some draft proposals or layout options shared pretty early in December, so that people can give feedback on that. To then refine the proposals in line with sort of comments and feedback received, and what we'll be working to is delivery of future measures on a similar trial basis as to this around February time next year, and then begin to review next steps and also how this will continue to be taken forward as part of the Council's Transport and Highways Capital Programme. I'm just going to pause there for a minute to take a sip of water, and also to check if anyone else wants to, from the hosting team, wants to come in with any comments before I go through some of the questions that we've received in advance, and also any other questions that have been placed in the chat so far this evening.
Joe, from the chat, there have been loads and loads of questions, and some of which I've been able to answer to go along. Apologies that I haven't all of them, there's a lot. But a couple of things that I think specifically you haven't covered and might be worth picking up in questions. Somebody did ask whether there was chance of camera enforcement on any of the measures that we're putting in. And the other thing people are saying is, how will they know exactly when the measures are going to go in, so that if they're driving down their street tomorrow, they know whether or not they can travel in that way, or whether the modal filters will be in place. Obviously, I've said we're having a few issues with being able to get hold of some of the materials, so at the moment we're not able to give an exact date, but I think that's something that concerns people, as to knowing what their street looks like today and tomorrow.
Okay, I can pick up on both of those things, as well as some of the questions that we've had in advance. I think in terms of just the sort of pre-meeting questions we've received, in terms of the particular locations, I've partly touched on the rationale there. In terms of what is planned in terms of future measures, I think with the Kings Heath low traffic neighbourhood pilot, we have identified a bit of a study area. We've got an indicative sort of future area for what we've termed South Moseley, but that's not finalised and that can change. And I know we've had some requests around extending that from Oxford Road up to Wake Green Road, and that's certainly something that we can look at and agree with everyone ahead of October and final confirmation on these schemes. I think we have received quite a few comments and concerns around some of the displacement effect and negative impact on other roads, neighbouring roads, parallel routes, where traffic might displace to, and also concerns around some of the distributor roads bordering the area. As I tried to sort of emphasise, this is around reducing traffic across Moseley and Kings Heath, and indeed through the transport plan, we're looking to reduce traffic across the city. Congestion has all sorts of negative impacts in terms of the economy, people's health, the environment. So we are committed to enabling and encouraging safe, sustainable travel across the city, regardless of what sort of classification of road people live on, and low traffic neighbourhoods is one element of that, alongside all sorts of other things. In terms of communicating with people not online, I think I've sort of acknowledged that we have had some challenges in what we've been able to do at the current time, and the public meetings and drop-in events haven't been possible, unfortunately. We have done a letter drop, and we have set up the comments box, so we're trying to do what we can there, and do very much want people to be able to comment in different ways. I think I mentioned Better Streets for Moseley previously. I sound like I'm constant plugs for them, but one thing that they've set up is street representatives, and that's one way that people who aren't online may be able to share comments with their street representative, and that can be fed back through the Better Streets for Moseley group and to the council. We do have regular contact with them. We're also happy to engage with other groups. There's no sort of favouritism there. We're very happy for others who want to share comments and pass feedback on behalf of others. I think I mentioned in terms of formal consultation that the timescale has sort of limited that to an extent, and also that under an experimental TRO it happens during the measures rather than beforehand, but there is still an opportunity for people to object to that traffic regulation order, and people will be written to about that. And touch briefly on the other questions Rebecca just mentioned. Camera enforcement, unfortunately, is something that we're sort of limited in where we can use that and how we can use that. So at the moment, it's only something we're able to do on something like a bus gate. It's not something that we're able to do where we've got school streets measures, for example. So if people are not complying with a school street closure, we can't use camera enforcement on that at the moment. I think it is something that government are reviewing, and potential changes to powers that local authorities have. It is something that we've fed back previously, because if we could have camera enforcement, then a lot more of this could be done with a sort of signs and lines approach. But I think, as people know, with 20 mile an hour, just putting signs up doesn't always get compliance from everyone. So sometimes it is possible for other engineering measures, whether it's traffic calming or road closures, to get that level of compliance. So unfortunately, we can't use camera enforcement at the moment for these measures, but it is something that London boroughs are able to do. Because of Transport for London and powers that local authorities have there, and we have, both as a city council and through the combined authority, made representation to have those powers in future, and also as part of maybe a future devolution deal around transport, that might be something that is possible in future. In terms of the installation of the measures, we will be putting up sort of advanced warning signs, so people will sort of see the no through road signs going up around these measures going in. What I'm trying to ensure, to the best of my ability, is to provide as much notice as possible when these measures are going to go in, particularly the actual installation of modal filters and the road closure points. I'm hoping to have almost like confirmed dates for that on Thursday, and then we'll look to cascade that information as much as we can, work with your local councillors to share information through Commonplace, social media, also people who have contacted us to register for this session. We'll try and get a notification out that way. So I think as soon as we know dates, we will be looking to communicate that alongside the advanced warning signs that will be in place as part of the measures. And then just sort of finishing off, because I'm conscious of time and we've got just about 5 minutes left. We've had a lot of people asking about how these changes are going to be monitored and how we'll determine whether or not they've been a success. We are putting a sort of project monitoring plan in place. What that does is, one, sort of captures all the existing data collection means that we have available to us, so where there are existing traffic counters, air quality monitors, etc., and also a lot of bus journey data time that we're able to get from the operators and Transport for West Midlands. We are sort of collating that. We are also using the Emergency Active Travel Fund monitoring budget to put in some additional traffic counts, and also working with a colleague to do some air quality monitoring through various means. So a number of ways of capturing data. We do have a challenge around getting a bit of an accurate baseline at the moment, because, as I mentioned, since March, traffic has not been as usual, and ever since lockdown it's been sort of gradually creeping back up, and it's only just now that I think we're about 90% of usual levels. So any baseline monitoring that we did do would have to be viewed through that perspective of the wider context, but we are putting monitoring in. Alongside that, a big part of how these schemes will be measured and determined a success or not is from feedback from local residents, businesses, community representatives, and other key partners, and we really do want to hear from people about how the measures are working once they're in place. As I mentioned, the Commonplace site will stay in operation throughout this trial period, so people can continue to comment through that, as well as emailing us, particularly with questions. But if there are things you want to highlight, the best way of doing that is Commonplace if you can, but we're always happy to be contacted with views on that. We will look to do a resident household survey at some stage, both in relation to future measures and working with how we might best do a resident survey for this area. But also towards the end of the trial period, we'll organise a household survey to get feedback on that. So through a combination of existing data points, some new counts, and that sort of local feedback, we will sort of look to determine the impact of these schemes. And then also alongside that, if we are going to look to make anything more permanent or bring anything forward on a more permanent basis, that would be subject to formal consultation, and we would publish that, and people would have the opportunity to express their views on that. We did share a frequently asked questions document with people joining this session this evening to try and sort of pick up some of the questions that we've been getting fairly regularly over the past few weeks. A lot of people have been asking about whether they can still access their own home, or the doctors or the shops, and I think, as I tried to sort of reassure earlier on, nothing that we're doing here will stop people from getting from where they are to where they need to go by car, if that's how they need to travel or if that's how they choose to travel, but there may be some sort of changes to the route. As mentioned in that document, emergency services are a key consideration here. From working with them, we know that the main thing that delays emergency service response time is congestion, and anything we can do to reduce congestion will help with that. Generally, as long as we inform them well in advance of these closures going in, which is another reason why I want to know the dates well in advance of them being implemented, emergency services are able to update their sat-nav systems, and they will route accordingly to that. But in some places, where if it is necessary for sort of like a real emergency situation, as we saw in Birmingham this weekend, then it is possible for emergency service vehicles to remove these measures and gain access if that is needed in the cause of public safety. Similarly with waste collection, working with them to look at how they could potentially reroute, turn in the street where that is an option, reverse for very short sections where that is also an option, and generally that's to a maximum of 25 metres, because we don't particularly want massive bin lorries reversing down large sections of residential streets. Where none of those are possibilities, then that is where we would have a lockable bollard that waste services are able to open and close so that they can pass through the modal filter. So what we're currently doing is working with them to identify locations and the best way of servicing that, because as we all know in Birmingham, it is very important that we get our waste collected each week. And finally, I think there are sort of some other related issues that come up quite a lot in terms of how will this impact on air pollution, speeding, parking issues, traffic issues, congestion. Low traffic neighbourhoods offer a lot of benefits, but they aren't necessarily a silver bullet that is going to solve all of these things overnight. They should, in the round, have benefits to a lot of these things. Anything we can do to reduce car dependency, to encourage more people to walk and cycle for local trips where they can, should help with some of these things. But all of these issues we need to continue to monitor. We do need to sort of look at what else can be done around this, so around speed reduction measures. In some places, sometimes residents feel parking permits is part of the solution, and we will look at that if that's something that people feel is necessary, although there's all sorts of challenges around how that's delivered, including how it's funded, and also if it is ultimately something that people want locally. But what we are looking to do through the Birmingham Transport Plan is reduce car dependency across the city, and to ensure that we have this sort of clean air response to the current COVID-19 situation, and try and sort of achieve some of those circumstances that we had at the height of lockdown, where people were able to get around their local area, walking, cycling, seeing residents during the clap for carers, shopping locally, all of those things, noticing nature more, experiencing cleaner air, and having less sort of challenges from cars dominating that environment. So I think, yes, we fully appreciate that there are all sorts of other issues within the area. We hope that low traffic neighbourhoods will bring some benefits to all of this, but this is coming forward very much as a trial scheme, as temporary measures in the first instance, and I can give you my full commitment that we're looking to work with everyone over the next few months in terms of these sort of initial measures, but also what else we can do to deliver places for people in Moseley and Kings Heath. I hope you found this informative. I hope it's provided people with more understanding of what we're bringing forward and why. I'm sure we haven't answered every single question that people have. We will review the comments, the questions, and the chat from this evening. We'll also look at getting back to people where there have been specific questions raised, either by email or other means. And we will provide an update as soon as we can on exact timescales for where this will be implemented, and hopefully arrange some pop-up events around those measures, so that at an appropriate social distance and with face masks and gloves on, no doubt, we can still have some conversations around how this is working and what people want to see in future to create these places for people. Thank you very much for this evening. I will leave it there so that people have plenty of time to go and either enjoy or avoid the England match, depending on your preference. But thank you very much for your time this evening.